She was a 22-year-old waitress, drowning in debt and forgotten dreams, serving coffee in a greasy spoon diner. He was a reclusive millionaire, a man who could buy anything in the world, but happiness haunted by a ghost from his past. When his most prized possession vanished from his table, he didn't hesitate to accuse her, to threaten her entire livelihood. But with her world crumbling, she looked the most powerful man she'd ever met in the eye and spoke 5 words that would change everything. Check the security footage. She thought it would prove her innocence. She never imagined that the very next day, a $500,000 Rolls-Royce would be waiting for her outside her run-down apartment. This isn't a story about a misunderstanding. It's about what the camera saw that no one else did, and how a secret buried for 50 years was about to erupt and change 2 lives forever. The scent of stale coffee and hot grease was the perfume of Clara Jenkins's life. At 22, she moved through the narrow aisles of the Daily Grind, a diner permanently stuck in a sepia-toned photograph of the 1970s, with the practiced, weary grace of a soldier navigating a familiar trench. Her dreams of charcoal sketches and gallery openings were buried under layers of student loan debt and her mother's mounting medical bills. Each plate of lukewarm eggs Benedict she delivered, each sticky table she wiped down, was a shovelful of dirt on that grave. Her apron, once a crisp white, now bore a Jackson Pollock-esque collection of stains, a dash of ketchup here, a smear of mustard there, a ghostly ring from a coffee cup placed carelessly on her pocket. It was a canvas of her servitude. That Tuesday began like any other. The morning rush was a symphony of clattering plates and shouted orders, conducted by Brenda, the diner's owner, a woman whose heart was as warm as her temper was short. Clara was in the weeds, juggling 3 tables, one of which was the dreaded Booth 4. Booth 4 was the self-proclaimed throne of Mr. Callum Drake. Callum Drake was a ghost who haunted the world of the living. Once a titan of industry, a name whispered with reverence in boardrooms, he had vanished from public life 5 years ago, after the death of his wife Eleanor. Now he was a creature of rigid habit. Every Tuesday and Thursday at precisely 9:00 a.m., his severe black Bentley would pull up to the curb, and he would emerge a tall, gaunt figure dressed in an impeccably tailored but somber suit that seemed to absorb the light around him. He was not a pleasant customer. He demanded his coffee black hot and filled to a specific line just below the brim. His toast had to be the color of pale almond, and his newspaper, the Financial Times, had to be folded crisply beside his plate, not touching it. Any deviation was met with a glacial stare from his pale blue eyes, a look that could curdle cream. Clara, being the most senior waitress, had inherited the honor of serving him. It was a trial by fire, a weekly test of her patience. On this particular Tuesday, the storm broke. A family with 3 sugar-fueled children had just left, leaving a sticky battlefield of syrup and half-eaten pancakes. As Clara rushed to clear the debris, a toddler's discarded toy, a small plastic dinosaur, skittered under her feet. She stumbled, her balance lost for a critical second. The fresh, scalding hot coffee she was carrying for Mr. Drake sloshed violently. A dark, hot wave crested over the rim of the cup and crashed directly onto the pristine pages of the Financial Times. The diner seemed to fall silent. The usual clatter and chatter died, replaced by a thick, anxious quiet. Clara froze the coffee pot still in her hand, her heart hammering against her ribs. Callum Drake slowly lowered the section of the paper he was reading. His eyes, cold as a winter sky, lifted from the spreading brown stain to fix on her. He didn't shout. He didn't raise his voice. He did something far worse. He spoke in a low, venomous whisper that cut through the silence. "Are you an imbecile?" The words struck Clara like a physical blow. Humiliation, hot and sharp, washed over her. I'm so sorry, sir. It was an accident. I tripped. An accident," he repeated the words, dripping with disdain. He gestured at the ruined paper with a long, slender finger. "This is not an accident. This is incompetence." Brenda was already rushing over her face, a mixture of apology and apprehension. "Mr. Drake, I am so sorry." "Clara, get a cloth. We'll get you a new coffee, a new paper, right away. On the house, of course." Drake waved a dismissive hand, not even gracing Brenda with a glance. His focus was entirely on Clara, who was dabbing futilely at the soaked paper with a damp rag. "Leave it. It's ruined." He began to gather his things, his movements stiff with anger. He pulled out a slim alligator leather wallet to pay for the coffee he hadn't drunk. He placed a $50 bill on the table, a clear statement of his displeasure. As he stood, his hand brushed against his waistcoat pocket, a gesture he made a dozen times during any meal. Then he froze. His hand patted the pocket again, more frantically this time. His face, already pale, turned ashen. "Where is it?" he breathed, the question directed at the empty space on the table. Sir Clara asked, her own voice trembling. His head snapped up, and his eyes, now blazing with a terrifying, panicked fire, locked onto hers. "My locket. It's gone." He patted his pockets again, a frantic, desperate search. "It was in my waistcoat pocket. It's always there. It's gone." Brenda stepped forward. "Miss Drake." Perhaps it fell. "Let's look around the booth." But Drake's gaze was cemented on Clara. His mind, conditioned by years of corporate takeovers and hostile negotiations, saw only the most logical, cynical explanation. The clumsy waitress, the distraction, the opportunity. "You," he snarled, pointing a trembling finger at her. "You bumped into me. You spilled the coffee as a distraction." Clara recoiled, as if he had slapped her. "What? No, I tripped." "A likely story. A girl like you working in a place like this. You see a man like me. It must be tempting." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. The other patrons were now openly staring their breakfasts forgotten. "I am not a thief," Clara said, her voice shaking, but gaining a sliver of steel. The humiliation was hardening into righteous anger. How dare he? How dare he stand there and assassinate her character in front of everyone? It was a silver locket. He pressed on his voice, rising in volume, fueled by a grief and panic that no one in the diner could understand. An antique. It's irreplaceable. "I didn't take your locket, sir." "Then where is it?" he roared, slamming his hand down on the table. The salt and pepper shakers jumped. Brenda tried to intervene again. "Mr. Drake, please let's be reasonable. We can all look for it. Clara has worked for me for 4 years. She's an honest girl." Honest Drake laughed a harsh, ugly sound. "The world is not an honest place. I want you to empty your pockets." This was the ultimate degradation, to be treated like a common criminal. Clara's eyes welled with tears, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give him the satisfaction. She looked past his furious face, past Brenda's worried expression, and up at the small black dome mounted on the ceiling in the corner. The security camera. A spark of defiance ignited within her. Her voice when she spoke was clear and steady, cutting through his tirade. "I will not empty my pockets," she said, her chin held high. "I am not a thief. You want to know what happened to your locket?" She met his furious gaze without flinching. "Check the security footage." The challenge silenced him. His rage was momentarily eclipsed by surprise at her audacity. He stared at her, this insignificant girl in a stained apron who had dared to stand up to him. Brenda, seeing a way to de-escalate, seized the opportunity. "That's a good idea. Mr. Drake, the footage is time-stamped. We can review it right now." But Drake was too proud, too angry to be placated. To him, her defiance was just another confirmation of her guilt. He sneered. "I don't need to check any footage. I know what happened. You're fired." He spat the words directed at Brenda, but his eyes still locked on Clara. "And if my locket is not returned to my office by the end of the day, I will be filing a police report. For theft." He turned on his heel and stormed out of the diner, leaving a wake of stunned silence and the lingering smell of burnt coffee and baseless accusation. Clara stood frozen, his threat echoing in her ears. Her job, her reputation, her entire fragile existence was about to be shattered. Brenda put a comforting hand on her shoulder, but it barely registered. All Clara could think about was the cold, indifferent eye of the camera on the ceiling, her only witness and her last hope. "Brenda," Clara whispered, her voice cracking. "He can't do that, can he?" Brenda sighed, her expression grim. "A man like Callum Drake can do whatever he wants." She gave Clara's shoulder a squeeze. "Go home for the day, sweetie. I'll have to pull the footage. I'll call you." The words hung in the air. "I'll have to pull the footage." A man like Drake didn't make idle threats. Clara was no longer just a waitress. She was a suspect. She walked out of the diner, the stares of the other customers like daggers in her back, and stepped into the grey afternoon, feeling as if the whole world had just found her guilty. Clara's apartment was a small third-floor walk-up that always smelled faintly of her downstairs neighbour's curry. It was her sanctuary, her studio and her cell. The walls were covered in her own charcoal drawings, expressive portraits, sweeping landscapes, studies of light and shadow. They were evidence of a life she was supposed to be living, a constant painful reminder of the dream she was deferring one cup of coffee at a time. She spent the rest of the day in a daze of anxiety. Every creak of the floorboards, every siren in the distance sent a jolt of fear through her. She imagined police officers knocking at her door, the shame of being led away in handcuffs. Her mother. What would this do to her mother? The stress alone could set her recovery back months. She replayed the scene in the diner 100 times, her own voice sounding bold and foreign to her. Check the security footage. Had it been brave or just foolish? What if the camera angle was bad? What if it didn't show anything clearly? What if by some impossible twist of fate the locket had fallen into her apron pocket without her realizing? She frantically checked her hands, trembling, but found only a crumpled napkin and a lip balm. Sleep offered no escape. She tossed and turned, caught in nightmares where Mr. Drake's face morphed into a judge's, his gavel slamming down as he pronounced her guilty. She awoke the next morning to the pale, watery light of dawn, feeling hollowed out. She checked her phone for the 10th time. Nothing from Brenda. That felt ominous. Surely if the footage had cleared her, Brenda would have called immediately. The silence was a confirmation of her worst fears. She was fired. A police report was probably already filed. The name Clara Jenkins was now synonymous with thief. She dragged herself to the small kitchen to make tea. her movements slow and heavy. As the kettle began to whistle, a strange sound from the street below caught her attention. It wasn't the usual rumble of the city waking up. It was a low, powerful purr, a sound so deep and smooth it seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. Curiosity piqued. She peered through the grimy window of her living room, and her breath caught in her throat. Parked directly in front of her dilapidated apartment building, a magnificent beast of chrome and steel was a Rolls-Royce Phantom. It wasn't just any Rolls-Royce. It was a stunning, bespoke model, its body a deep, lustrous midnight blue that seemed to drink the morning light. It was so out of place on her run-down street that it looked like a spaceship had landed. Her neighbors were already starting to gather on the sidewalk, pointing and whispering. Kids on their way to school stopped to stare, their mouths agape. Clara's first thought was that it was a movie shoot. It was the only logical explanation. But there were no cameras, no crew, no barricades. Just the car idling with an almost silent, intimidating power. Then the driver's door opened. A man in a crisp black chauffeur's uniform stepped out. He was tall and impassive, wearing white gloves. He walked not to the front door of the building, but to the passenger side rear door. He opened it with a quiet, reverent click and stood waiting. For whom Clara wondered. The wealthy tech mogul who lived in the newly renovated penthouse down the block. But the chauffeur was looking up, directly at her window. He seemed to have been waiting for her to appear. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Clara's heart began to pound, a frantic, bewildering rhythm. This couldn't be Hua. Bimamo. It was impossible, a prank, a mistake. Just then her phone buzzed. She snatched it up, her hands shaking. The screen read, Brenda. Brenda. Oh my God, I've been so worried. Did you see the footage? What happened? Brenda's voice was strained, and there was an undercurrent of awe in it that Clara had never heard before. Clara, I saw it. I saw the whole thing. And it shows I didn't take it right. Clara pleaded. It shows everything, honey. It shows a lot more than that. Brenda paused, and Clara could hear her take a deep breath. Mr. Drake called me last night. Very late. He was different, apologetic. I've never heard him sound like that. So he's not pressing charges. Relief washed over Clara, so potent it made her dizzy. Pressing charges, honey. Well, just look outside your window. I am. There's a Rolls-Royce out there. The whole neighborhood is freaking out, Clara Brenda said slowly, enunciating each word carefully. That car is for you. Clara sank onto the arm of her worn-out sofa, the phone nearly slipping from her grasp. That's insane. Why, he wouldn't tell me everything. He just said he was wrong. Terribly, horribly wrong. And he said the camera showed him something he had been blind to for years. He wants to see you, Clara. He wants to apologize in person. That car is waiting to take you to his home. Clara stared at the impossible car, at the impassive chauffeur, standing like a statue beside it. This was happening. This was real. Yesterday she was an accused thief on the verge of ruin. Today, a chariot of the gods was waiting at her curb. The two events were so cosmically disparate that they didn't make sense. An apology for a false accusation. A man like Callum Drake didn't send a Rolls-Royce to say, I'm sorry. He might send a check, a curtly worded letter from his lawyer. This This was something else entirely. The camera showed him something he had been blind to for years. Brenda's words echoed in her mind. What could the security camera possibly have shown him? A grainy, black-and-white video of a clumsy waitress and a chaotic diner. It made no sense. Fear and curiosity warred within her. The offer was terrifying. A trip to the lion's den. But what was the alternative? To hide in her apartment, forever wondering to refuse, would be to slam the door on the one thing that could explain the surreal turn her life had just taken. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she made a decision. She would face the lion. "Tell the driver," she said to Brenda, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll be down in 5 minutes." She hung up the phone and walked to her closet, her mind racing. What do you wear to meet the millionaire who tried to ruin your life and then sent a Rolls-Royce to fetch you? Her wardrobe consisted of jeans, t-shirts, and her waitress uniform. She settled on her one good outfit, a simple black dress she'd bought for a community art show 2 years ago. It was modest and clean. It would have to do. As she walked down the creaking stairs of her building, she felt the eyes of her neighbors on her. Mrs. Gable from 2B, who always complained about her music, peeked out her door, her eyes wide. The kids on the landing fell silent. It was a walk of fame and a walk of shame all at once. She pushed open the front door and stepped into the morning air. The chauffeur, whose name she would learn was Arthur, inclined his head. "Miss Jenkins?" he asked, his voice a polite, low baritone. She nodded, unable to speak. He held the door open for her. She slid on to the plush leather seat, which was softer than her own mattress. The door closed with a silent, satisfying thud, sealing her off from the world she knew. The murmuring of her neighbors, the sounds of the city, all of it vanished, replaced by an opulent, unnerving silence, as the magnificent car pulled away from the curb, as smoothly as a ship leaving port. Clara looked back at her small, insignificant apartment building. She had a strange, powerful feeling that she wasn't just leaving for a meeting. She was leaving a part of her life behind, forever. She was driving into the heart of a mystery, and she was terrified of what she might find. The journey was a silent 20-minute glide through a world Clara had only ever seen in magazines. The gritty urban landscape of her neighborhood dissolved into tree-lined avenues and then into the manicured palatial grandeur of the city's most exclusive enclave. The car turned into a long, winding driveway, hidden from the road by a towering stone wall and a formidable wrought-iron gate that opened silently as they approached. Callum Drake didn't live in a house. He lived in a museum. It was a sprawling Georgian-style mansion of pale stone surrounded by acres of immaculate gardens that looked as though each blade of grass had been individually trimmed. It was beautiful, but it was a lonely beauty. There were no children's toys on the lawn, no signs of life, just a perfect, sterile order. Arthur opened her door and led her up a grand stone staircase to a front door that was at least 12 feet high. It swung open before he could touch it, revealing a stern-looking woman in a grey dress, the housekeeper. "Miss Jenkins," the woman said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Mr. Drake is waiting for you in the West Gallery." Clara followed her through a cavernous foyer with a marble floor and a chandelier that looked like a cascade of frozen diamonds. The air was cool and smelled of lemon polish and old books. Their footsteps echoed the only sound in the vast, silent house. It felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum. The West Gallery was a long, sun-drenched room with a wall of glass overlooking the gardens. The other 3 walls were filled with art. But it wasn't the kind of corporate abstract art Clara had expected. These were paintings filled with life and color and emotion. There were vibrant landscapes, intimate still lifes, and powerful portraits. It was a stunning collection. Callum Drake stood at the far end of the gallery, his back to her, staring at a large canvas that hung in a place of honor above a marble fireplace. He was dressed in the same dark suit, but he seemed smaller today, less imposing, without the armor of his anger. He turned as she entered, and for the first time Clara saw something other than cold fury in his eyes. There was exhaustion, regret, and a deep, profound sadness. "Miss Jenkins." "Clara," he said, his voice quiet. "Thank you for coming. Please." He gestured to 2 plush armchairs near the fireplace. She sat stiffly on the edge of the seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The housekeeper vanished as silently as she had appeared. "I imagine you are confused," he began, forgoing the chair and remaining on his feet. "That would be one word for it," Clara replied, her voice steady, despite the hammering of her heart. He gave a small, wry smile that didn't reach his eyes. "First and most importantly, I must offer you my most profound and sincere apology. My behavior yesterday was inexcusable. It was vile. I accused you of something you did not want to do, and I publicly humiliated you. There is no excuse for it, but there is a reason, and I owe you that explanation." He walked over to a small table and picked up a silver object that glinted in the light. "The locket. This belonged to my wife, Eleanor," he said, his voice growing thick with emotion. "She passed away 5 years ago. This locket, it was the first gift I ever bought her when I had nothing. Before all this," he gestured vaguely at the opulent room. "It's the most valuable thing I own. When I thought it was gone..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "I reacted out of grief and panic. I saw a target and I lashed out. It was a monstrous thing to do, and I am truly deeply sorry." He placed the locket back on the table. "Brenda suspended you on my instruction. I called her last night and corrected that. Your job is safe, and I have sent the diner a check to compensate for the disturbance and to cover your wages for the next year as a preliminary apology. A year's wages." Clara felt a wave of dizziness. That was more money than she had seen in her entire life. It would pay off a huge chunk of her loans. It would mean she could finally get her mother the better care she needed. "But that's not why I asked you here," he continued, his tone shifting. He turned his gaze back to the large painting above the fireplace. "I asked you here because of what I saw on the security footage." Clara leaned forward. "What did you see? Did you see who took it?" "Oh yes," he said dismissively. "The camera was perfectly clear. As you were tending to another table, one of the busboys, Marco, I believe, saw the locket fall from my pocket when I stood. He covered it with a napkin and pocketed it when he cleared the table. I have dealt with that matter. My security team retrieved the locket from a pawn shop this morning. But that's not what I'm talking about." He paused, taking a deep breath. "My security chief sent the footage to my personal computer. It was high definition, crystal clear. I was looking for the thief. But then I saw you." He pointed a remote at a large screen hidden behind a paneled wall which slid open silently. The security footage flickered to life. There was the diner in grainy but sharp detail. There was Drake himself storming out. And there was Clara standing alone for a moment in the wake of his fury. "Watch," he said softly. On the screen, Clara, looking utterly defeated, leaned against the counter. She pulled a small, worn sketchbook and a piece of charcoal from her apron pocket, a habit she had to sketch during her short, infrequent breaks. For just 30 seconds before Brenda came over, her hand moved across the page, her face a mask of concentration. The camera, positioned almost directly above her, had a clear view of the paper. She was sketching the face of an old man at the counter, capturing his weary expression with a few deft strokes. "My God," Callum whispered, staring at the screen. He wasn't talking to Clara. He was reliving the moment he first saw it. He froze the frame, then zoomed in the image, pixelating slightly. But the details were still clear. The confident lines, the understanding of light and shadow, the raw emotion captured in the sketch. "Your drawing," he said, his voice filled with a strange reverence. "The style, the technique, the soul in it." He turned off the screen and looked at her, his eyes boring into hers. "Where did you learn to draw like that?" Clara was bewildered. This was the big reveal. That he liked her art. I've been drawing my whole life. I took some classes in community college before I had to drop out. Mostly I taught myself. "No," he said, shaking his head. "Someone must have taught you. A parent, a grandparent." Clara frowned. "My father was an accountant. My mother is a nurse. No one in my immediate family is an artist. My grandmother, my mother's mother, she used to draw with me when I was very little. She was the one who gave me my first sketchbook. But she passed away when I was 7. Callum's expression was intense, a complex mixture of hope and fear. "Your grandmother? What was her name?" "Rosemary," Clara said. "Rosemary Jenkins." Callum Drake didn't react, but a subtle tension entered his frame. He turned and walked slowly toward the painting above the fireplace. Clara now saw it properly for the first time. It was a portrait of a beautiful woman with kind, intelligent eyes and a gentle smile. She was seated in a garden bathed in golden light. The style of the painting, the bold brushwork, the emotional depth, the way the light fell was breathtaking and terrifyingly familiar. It was like looking at a fully realized professional version of her own work. The artistic DNA was identical. "This," Callum said, his voice cracking slightly, "is my Eleanor, my late wife. She painted this. It was her last self-portrait before we were married." Clara stood up and walked closer, her heart pounding. She felt a strange connection to the woman in the painting, a ghost of a memory, a whisper of a forgotten song. "Before she met me," Callum continued, his voice heavy with a guilt that seemed ancient, "Eleanor was an artist, a brilliant one. But her family was old money, very traditional. They disapproved. They wanted her to marry well, to be a socialite. When she chose me, I was nobody, then just a brash upstart with more ambition than sense. They gave her an ultimatum. Her art or me." He looked at the painting with infinite sadness. She chose me, and she never painted again. It was the great tragedy of her life, and my greatest regret. He turned back to Clara, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "For 50 years I thought her artistic spirit had died with that choice. I thought it was gone from the world forever. And then yesterday on a security camera, in a greasy spoon diner, I saw it again. I saw her ghost. In your hand. In your sketchbook. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but they were forming a picture so impossible, so earth-shattering that Clara's mind struggled to accept it. Your grandmother Rosemary Callum, said his voice barely a whisper. Did she ever speak of a sister? An older sister she lost touch with. Clara searched the dusty archives of her childhood memories. Vague images surfaced. Her grandmother, sitting on the porch, sketching in a book, a sad look on her face. A story she once told a very young Clara about having a sister who went away to live in a castle. Clara had always assumed it was a fairy tale. I think so, Clara stammered. She said she had a sister. A long time ago. They had a fight, a family argument. She never saw her again. Callum Drake closed his eyes, and a single tear finally escaped, tracing a path through the weathered lines of his face. Eleanor's maiden name was not Drake, he said, his voice trembling with the weight of a 50-year-old revelation. It was Maxwell, but the name she was born with, the name her estranged younger sister Rosemary would have known her by, was Eleanor Jenkins. The world tilted on its axis. The silent, opulent room seemed to rush in on Clara. Eleanor, Rosemary, Jenkins. The fairy tale was real. The woman in the painting, the brilliant artist, the lost love of this powerful broken man, was her great-aunt. The artistic talent she thought was hers alone was a legacy, an inheritance of the soul passed down from a sister to a sister, and then to that sister's grandchild. The Rolls-Royce, the mansion, the apology. It wasn't about a locket. It was about a ghost. Callum Drake hadn't just found his wife's lost possession. He had found a living, breathing piece of her lost soul. He had found Clara. The revelation hung in the air, as heavy and as fragile as the crystal chandelier above them. Clara sank back into the armchair, her mind a whirlwind. Her grandmother had a sister, a famous, wealthy sister she had never known. The art that flowed from her fingers was a current that had run through her family's hidden history. Callum, meanwhile, seemed to be grappling with his own tidal wave of emotions. He paced the gallery, running a hand through his thinning grey hair. He was a man who had controlled markets, built empires, and bent the world to his will. But he was utterly adrift in the face of this fragile human connection to his past. I need to think, he murmured, more to himself than to Clara. This changes things. This changes everything. It was at that moment that a new voice, sharp and laced with aristocratic condescension, cut through the charged atmosphere. Father, what is going on here? My office has been calling you all morning. They said you cancelled the quarterly acquisitions meeting for this. A young man stood in the doorway of the gallery. He was handsome, in a severe, polished way, in his early 30s, with his father's height, but none of his weathered gravitas. He was dressed in a suit that was even more expensive than Callum's, but he wore it like a uniform of entitlement. This was Felix Drake, Callum's only son, and the heir to the Drake empire. Felix's eyes swept the room, taking in his father's disheveled state and then landing on Clara. He scanned her simple black dress, her worn-out shoes, and his lip curled in a faint, almost imperceptible sneer. He saw a waitress in a palace, and his mind leaped to the most obvious and cynical conclusion. Don't tell me Felix said, a mocking edge to his voice. This is the little thief from the diner I heard about the commotion you caused yesterday. I can't believe you brought her here. Are you paying her off? I hope you're not being too generous. Callum's head snapped up, his grief-stricken demeanor vanishing in a flash, replaced by a cold fury that Clara recognized from the diner. That is enough, Felix. Enough. Felix scoffed, stepping further into the room. Father, you've been erratic for years, but this is a new level. First you have a public meltdown over a trinket. Then you send the bloody family Rolls-Royce, the one mother loved, to pick up this girl from some slum. And now you're having tea with her. Have you lost your mind? Is she threatening to go to the papers? Her name is Clara Jenkins. Callum said, his voice dangerously low. And she is a guest in this house. You will show her respect. Respect. Felix laughed, a short, ugly bark. She's a gold digger, father. It's the oldest trick in the book. 'Cause a scene play the victim and then squeeze the guilt-ridden old man for all he's worth. How much does she want? 10,020. Just pay her and get her out of our lives. Clara, who had been sitting in stunned silence, felt a hot surge of anger. The same sense of righteous indignation she'd felt during the accusation in the diner returned tenfold. She stood up, her small frame radiating a surprising intensity. I don't want your money, Mr. Drake, she said, her voice clear and cutting, addressing Felix directly. And for the record, your father invited me here. Felix turned his dismissive gaze on her. Oh, I'm sure he did. My father, since my mother died, has a weakness for lost causes. Felix, I am warning you, Callum thundered. But Clara held up a hand, stopping him. She would fight her own battles. She looked Felix square in the eye. This has nothing to do with money. This is about family. Felix's sneer deepened. Family? Are you claiming to be a long-lost cousin now? The story gets better and better. Let me guess, your sob story is that. Your great-grandfather was a stable boy on the Drake estate. No, Clara said calmly, though her heart was hammering. My grandmother was Rosemary Jenkins. Her sister was Eleanor Jenkins. Your mother. The silence that followed was absolute. Felix's smug expression faltered, his face slackening with disbelief, which quickly curdled back into suspicion. He looked from Clara's defiant face to his father's pained one. That's absurd, Felix stammered. Mother was an only child. No, Callum said, his voice heavy with the weight of old secrets. She wasn't. She had a younger sister, Rosemary. They were estranged long before I met Eleanor. After a terrible argument with their parents, Rosemary left home with nothing. Eleanor was forbidden from contacting her. It was a source of great pain for her entire life. Felix stared at his father, his meticulously ordered world beginning to fracture. You never told me. Eleanor made me promise, Callum said sadly. It was too painful for her to speak of. She felt she had abandoned her sister. She chose me, and in doing so she lost her. It was a sin of omission. I am as guilty of as she was. Felix turned his glare back to Clara, his mind now racing to reframe the situation, not as a fairy tale, but as a sophisticated con. This is a lie. A well-researched, despicable lie. How could you possibly prove such a ridiculous claim? The art, Callum said simply. He gestured to Eleanor's self-portrait, and then to the large screen, which still showed the frozen image of Clara's sketch. Look at it, Felix. The line work, the spirit. It's the same. It is a gift passed down through their bloodline. Felix glanced at the images, but his cynicism was a shield, a talented forger, a lucky coincidence. People can be taught to mimic a style. This is a scam, Father. Can't you see it? She found out about some obscure family history perhaps from some old public record, and she's exploiting it. She's playing on your grief. The accusation was poisonous. It sought to twist the most beautiful, miraculous discovery of Callum's recent life into something dirty and calculated. Clara felt a wave of despair. How could she prove it? Her word against his. A family resemblance in art was subjective, not hard evidence. But then a memory surfaced, a concrete object, the sketchbooks, she said suddenly. Callum and Felix both looked at her. My grandmother Clara explained, her mind racing. When she died, my mother packed away a few of her things. I was so young, but I remember a box. It had her old sketchbooks in it. My mother saved them for me. They're in a storage locker. Callum's eyes lit up with a renewed fire. Get them, he said, his voice urgent. Arthur will take you. Whatever you need. Felix let out an exasperated sigh. Father, you are not sending her off in the Rolls-Royce again to fetch some box of mouldy old drawings. This is madness. This is not madness, Felix. This is my one chance to right a 50-year-old wrong. Callum's voice boomed through the gallery, shaking with an intensity Felix had not seen in years. This is for your mother, for Eleanor. While you've been busy building your own little empire on the foundations, I laid you've forgotten what this family was built on. It was built on love, a love that I forced your mother to make a terrible choice for. If this girl, this family is a consequence of that choice, then I will move heaven and earth to make it right. The force of his father's conviction stunned Felix into silence. He saw a passion in Callum that had long been dormant, a fire lit not by a corporate merger, but by a waitress's sketch. It was a power he didn't understand and couldn't control, and it frightened him. Callum turned to Clara, his expression softening. Go, Clara. Please, bring the sketchbooks. As Arthur escorted Clara from the gallery, back through the silent marble halls, she could hear the raised voices of the father and son echoing behind her. How could you be so naive? Felix's voice dripped with contempt. And how could you be so cynical? Callum's voice retorted, full of weary disappointment. You have your mother's eyes, but you have none of her heart. Clara slid back into the plush leather of the Rolls-Royce, the argument fading behind her. The initial shock and wonder of the morning were now tangled with a new bitter reality. She hadn't just discovered a family. She had walked into a war. Felix Drake would never accept her. He would see her as a threat to his inheritance, to his identity, to the sanitized memory of his mother. The sketchbooks were no longer just a sentimental link to her grandmother. They were now her evidence, her proof of identity. As the great car purred its way back towards her side of the city, Clara prayed that the fragile, pencil-marked pages, stored away in a dark locker for 15 years, held the truth she so desperately needed. The journey to the storage facility was a silent, anxious blur. The imposing luxury of the Rolls-Royce felt utterly surreal parked beside the rows of stark orange garage doors. In the cool, stale air of Unit 3B, amidst the ghosts of her past packed in cardboard, Clara found them. Tucked inside a plastic tote labeled Rosemary's Things were 3 thick leather-bound sketchbooks. Their covers were worn smooth with a lifetime of use. She carried them back to the car, as if they were sacred texts. She was escorted not to the gallery, but to a warm, richly appointed library where a fire crackled in the hearth. The change of setting felt intentional, more intimate. Callum stood waiting by a large mahogany desk, his face etched with a desperate hope. Felix was nowhere to be seen, a small mercy that allowed the tension in Clara's shoulders to ease slightly. "May I?" Callum asked, his voice soft as she placed the sketchbooks on the polished wood. Clara simply nodded her throat, too tight for words. With a reverence usually reserved for priceless artifacts, Callum opened the first volume. He turned the age-yellowed pages, his breath catching audibly. Here was the life his wife's sister had lived, rendered in charcoal and pencil. There were sketches of flowers, portraits of neighbors, studies of her own aging hands. The artistic DNA was undeniable, the same empathy in the lines, the same soulfulness Clara recognized in her great-aunt's work and felt in her own. Callum was seeing the lost years, a talent flourishing in quiet dignity, a world away from his own. "It's her," he whispered, tracing a finger over a self-portrait of an older Rosemary, seeing the faint echo of Eleanor in the woman's kind eyes. He moved to the second book, and then the third, completely absorbed. He was a man, piecing together a family history he never knew he had. Then, near the end of the final book, he froze. His entire body went rigid. "My God," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. He turned the sketchbook around for Clara to see. The drawing was of a charming storybook cottage with a rose trellis climbing its front porch. It was the inscription below it, however, in her grandmother's elegant script, that made the air in the room stand still. "Our promise. Our place someday. E&R." Beneath the inscription was an address, Blackwood Cottage, Lakeview Lane, Ambleside. Clara looked at it, utterly bewildered. "I don't understand. What is it?" Callum looked up, his eyes wide with a staggering revelation. "Blackwood Cottage," he said, his voice trembling. "Before Eleanor and I were married, when her family's pressure was unbearable, we secretly bought a small property in her name. A place she could paint, a place where we could be free from them all. She called it our promise place. We planned to run away there if we had to." He pointed a shaking finger at the sketchbook. "That is the cottage. She must have shown a drawing of it to Rosemary. It wasn't just my secret with Eleanor, it was their secret too. A dream they shared. The proof was absolute. It was more than a shared talent. It was a shared secret, a promise immortalized on a yellowed page. No con artist could have known this. It was a message from the past, a truth delivered across a 50-year divide. As this monumental truth settled between them, the library doors swung open. Felix strode in his face a mask of impatient skepticism. "Father, this farce has gone on long enough. Are you still entertaining this girl's fantasies?" Callum didn't answer. He simply turned the open sketchbook around on the desk, his expression one of quiet, unshakable certainty. "Look." Felix marched forward, his gaze falling upon the drawing. He read the inscription. He saw the address. The color drained from his face. His arrogant posture collapsed as if his strings had been cut. "Blackwood Cottage," he whispered. He knew the name. It was a minor asset in his mother's trust, a property he'd always dismissed, never knowing its profound significance. "Your mother's promise place," Callum said softly. A secret she shared with her sister. A secret now passed down to her sister's granddaughter. Felix stared from the irrefutable proof in the book, to Clara's dignified face, and then to the tearful conviction in his father's eyes. The intricate web of his cynicism, his arrogant certainty of a scam, was instantly annihilated. He had been wrong, horribly, poisonously wrong. He had guarded a sanitized version of his mother's memory, erasing the very sister whose loss had caused her so much pain. Clara wasn't a threat to his mother's legacy. She was a living, breathing part of it. Shame, hot and sharp, washed over him. He sank into a nearby chair, the proud heir reduced to a humbled son. He began, his voice cracking. He looked directly at Clara, his eyes filled with a genuine, agonizing regret. Miss Jenkins. Clara. I was wrong. What I said, what I thought, it was unforgivable. I am so sorry. The apology hung in the charged silence. Before Clara could even process it, Callum's personal phone buzzed on the desk. He glanced at the ID's head of security. David. He answered, his tone shifting to business. He listened for a moment, his expression hardening into grim lines. I see. No. Do not involve the police. I will handle this myself. Thank you. He ended the call, his face a mask of grim contemplation. What is it? Father Felix asked, sensing the sudden shift. Callum's gaze met Clara's. It's about Marco, the busboy. His theft of the locket. It wasn't entirely random. It was personal. He took a deep breath. His father was a foreman at a Drake Industries factory. He was laid off during a restructuring I ordered 15 years ago. The man lost everything. According to my head of security, Marco blames me for his father's subsequent death. He saw the locket fall, and he took it. It was a crime of opportunity, born from a long, festering desire for revenge. The story of the faceless thief was suddenly a tragedy. Marco was collateral damage from a long-forgotten business decision. Another ghost from Callum's past, returning to haunt him. The initial incident was reframed no longer a simple theft, but the desperate act of a wounded son. Callum Drake looked at the sketchbook, at his own humbled son, and at the young woman who was the living key to his past. His life was a ledger of broken connections and unintended consequences. His coldness in business had created an enemy. His demands on his wife had shattered her family. His arrogance in a diner had nearly destroyed the one person who could lead him to redemption. He stood a new resolve solidifying in his eyes. He was no longer just a grieving tycoon. He was a man with a chance to atone. Felix, he said, his voice firm with purpose. We are going to see this young man, not to punish him, to listen, and to help. Then he turned to Clara, his expression softening into one of profound warmth. And you, Clara, you are not a guest here. You are home. This family has a debt to yours that can never truly be repaid. But I will spend the rest of my life trying. He gestured around the magnificent library. This is all just wood and paper. Meaningless. You have brought your great-aunt's spirit back into this house. Now let me help you give your own art to the world. In the firelit library, the three of them were no longer defined by their former roles. They were bound by a complex tapestry of art loss and the improbable, miraculous chance to rebuild. And so a story that began with a spilled coffee and a cruel accusation became a story of redemption. Callum Drake, humbled and changed, didn't just offer Clara money. He offered her a legacy. He established the Eleanor and Rosemary Foundation for the Arts, dedicated to supporting struggling young artists who, like them, had the talent, but not the opportunity. Clara became its first recipient and its guiding voice. Her first solo gallery show featuring her own work alongside the newly discovered paintings of her great-aunt Eleanor was a sensation. Felix, his heart opened, became the Foundation's fiercest advocate, using his business acumen to help others instead of just himself. The Rolls-Royce that once waited outside Clara's apartment now serves to bring young, undiscovered artists to the mansion for mentorship. It's no longer a symbol of power, but of possibility. This story reminds us that beneath the surface of our daily lives, there are invisible threads connecting us in ways we can't even imagine. It shows us that a single moment of choice to be cruel or to be curious, to accuse or to investigate, can change the entire trajectory of our lives. It proves that it's never too late to right a wrong, to heal a family, and to apologize not just with words, but with actions that create a better future. What would you have done if you were in Clara's shoes? Or Callum's? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of fate, art, and second chances moved you, please give this video a like. Share it with someone who believes in the magic of hidden connections, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that prove truth is often more incredible than fiction. Thank you for listening. What does a billionaire on the verge of signing a $100 million deal have in common with the waitress pouring his water? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. At least that's what Harrison Sterling thought. He was sitting in Aurelia, one of New York's most exclusive restaurants, about to change the world of green energy. The contracts were open, the pen was in his hand. But he never saw her coming. He never imagined that a quiet waitress with tired eyes and a tragic past held the one secret that could either save his entire legacy or shatter it into a million hesitations. He was about to sign. Then she leaned in, and with a whisper that cut through the silence, she said 4 words that stopped his world cold. "That's the wrong formula." The air in Aurelia was thick with the scent of money. Not the crisp, vulgar smell of new bills, but the ancient, ingrained aroma of generational wealth, a subtle perfume of truffle oil, vintage leather, and effortless power. Isabella Rossi breathed it in every night. For 8 hours, she'd glide between tables, draped in starched white linen, a ghost in a black uniform, her own identity dissolving into the polished mahogany and crystal glassware. Tonight, table 12 was the center of the restaurant's universe. It was an unofficial throne nestled in a secluded alcove with a panoramic view of the glittering Manhattan skyline. And seated at its head was the King Harrison Sterling. Bella knew the name, of course. Everyone did. Sterling, the boy genius from MIT who founded Sterling Dynamics and was now, at 38, a titan of the tech industry. His face, usually seen on the cover of Forbes or Wired, was even more intense in person. Sharp jaw eyes the color of a stormy sea, and an aura of restless energy that seemed barely contained by his bespoke Tom Ford suit. He wasn't just in the room. He owned the space it occupied. With him were 2 men in similarly expensive suits, investors Bella guessed by their cautious expressions and deferential posture. These were Mr. Davenport, a silver-haired patriarch of an old banking family, and Kenji Tanaka from a Tokyo-based venture capital fund. But Bella's attention was drawn to the 4th man, Dr. Robert Kendrick Sterling's head of R&D. He was preening his chest, puffed out, basking in the glow of his boss's success. Bella had served them their appetizers, a delicate, seared scallop dish, and was now refilling their water glasses, her movements practiced and invisible. It was a skill she had perfected to be present, but unseen to hear everything and register nothing. The efficiency is unprecedented. Harrison Kendrick was saying, his voice a little too loud. The Sterling Kendrick catalyst and I do appreciate the joint credit. Truly will reduce the energy cost of electrolysis by 60%. This isn't incremental. This is a paradigm shift. Green hydrogen becomes cheaper than natural gas. Harrison Sterling nodded a curt, impatient gesture. He tapped a sleek black tablet on the table. Show them the core equation, Robert. The part that matters. Kendrick, beaming, picked up a pen and smoothly uncapped it. He grabbed a thick linen napkin, a minor sacrilege in a place like Aurelia, and began to write. Bella's heart gave a strange, painful lurch. It was an echo from a life she had buried 6 years ago. A life of whiteboards, quantum mechanics, and the thrilling pursuit of discovery. A life before the betrayal, before the debt, before this black uniform became her skin. She tried to look away, to focus on the condensation of the water pitcher in her hand. It's not your world anymore, Bella. But she couldn't. Her eyes were drawn to the elegant, flowing script on the napkin. Kendrick was explaining his work with condescending simplicity. It boils down to maximizing the probability of quantum tunneling for the proton transfer. We manipulate the electron spin state of the platinum-iridium lattice. The equation governing the catalytic efficiency, I, is what secures our patent. He finished with a flourish, sliding the napkin to the center of the table. Mr. Davenport and Mr. Tanaka stared at the equation with the polite, uncomprehending reverence of men who dealt in dollars, not Daltons. Sterling, however, studied it with fierce intensity. And the quantum tunneling probability? Function psi. It's stable across all temperatures and pressures we've modeled, ironclad Kendrick said with a smug smile. That's the secret sauce. My own proprietary work. Bella froze. Her hand holding the heavy pitcher trembled almost imperceptibly. Her gaze was fixed on the last term of the equation, puisque s. She could see the full notation in her mind, the complex integral she had spent 2 years of her PhD program deriving. The world around her fell away. The clinking of cutlery, the murmur of conversation, the city lights outside the window. It all vanished. She was back in a dusty university lab, smelling of ozone and old coffee. She was standing in front of a whiteboard, her hand covered in marker dust, arguing passionately with her advisor, Professor Albright. She remembered the exhilarating moment of breakthrough, the elegant simplicity of the final proof, her secret source. And it was wrong. Not just slightly off. Catastrophically wrong. She had discovered the error herself a week before she was set to defend her thesis. A subtle yet fatal miscalculation in the electron density variable so-called. When corrected, it didn't just reduce the efficiency. Under high-pressure conditions, the whole reaction became unstable. It created a volatile, explosive byproduct. She had told Albright. He had dismissed her concerns, called it pre-defense jitters. 2 weeks later, he published her original flawed research under his own name, and Kendrick's his former postdoc student. Her name was nowhere. The academic board sided with the tenured professor. Broken and buried in legal threats, she couldn't afford to fight. She dropped out, disappearing into the anonymity of the service industry. Now, 6 years later, her ghost had come back to haunt her on a rich man's napkin, and they were about to build $100 million time bomb on top of it. Bella's breath caught in her throat. The investors were nodding. Harrison Sterling was reaching for the portfolio of contracts Mr. Davenport had slid across the table. A Mont Blanc pen appeared in his hand. The deal was seconds from being done. She could say nothing. She could let it happen. It wasn't her problem. She was just a waitress, fired for disrupting a high-profile dinner, blacklisted. Who would believe her? But she saw the headline in her mind. Sterling Dynamics plant explosion kills dozens. She saw the smug look on Kendrick's face, a man getting rich and famous off a lie that would get people killed. The old fire, the one she thought had been extinguished by years of grief and exhaustion, roared to life in her chest. Harrison Sterling uncapped the pen. The soft click echoed in the sudden silence of Bella's world. She moved before she could second-guess herself. Her feet carried her forward silent on the plush carpet. She leaned over Sterling's shoulder, her professional waitress smile a mask of stone, as if to ask if he needed more bread. Her voice was a ghost of a whisper, meant for him alone, a tiny pinprick in the monumental silence of the deal. "Mr. Sterling," she breathed, her lips just inches from his ear. "Don't sign. That's the wrong formula." The world didn't stop, but for Harrison Sterling, it felt like it did. His universe was one of data control and calculated risks. It operated on a set of rigid, predictable principles. A waitress, an anonymous cog in the service machine of a restaurant he'd probably never visit again, did not whisper cryptographic warnings about quantum chemistry in his ear. It was a variable he couldn't compute. His hand holding the pen froze millimeters above the signature line. For a fraction of a second, his mind refused to process the words, dismissing them as an auditory hallucination. He half-turned his stormy eyes, locking onto Bella's. He saw a young woman, maybe late 20s, with dark, intelligent eyes that held a depth of seriousness utterly at odds with her role. There was no hint of a prank, no trace of madness. There was only a calm, terrifying certainty. "What did you just say?" His voice was low, a dangerous rumble beneath the surface of the conversation. The other three men at the table looked up their polite smiles, faltering. The spell was broken. Mr. Davenport lowered his glasses. "Is there a problem?" Harrison Bella didn't flinch under Sterling's intense scrutiny. She stood perfectly still, her professional poise unwavering, though her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had crossed a line from which there was no return. "My apologies, sir," she said, her voice still quiet, but clear and steady. "I misspoke." She began to retreat, the survival instinct screaming at her to flee. But Sterling wasn't letting go. He hadn't become a billionaire by ignoring anomalies. "No," he said, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You didn't misspeak." "Say it again." Dr. Kendrick scoffed, a bubble of indignant laughter escaping his lips. "Harrison, what is this?" "The staff is interrupting." He shot Bella a look of pure venom, a glare that said, "You are fired before you even reach the kitchen." Bella's eyes flickered to Kendrick, and in them Harrison saw a flash of something he didn't expect, not fear, but contempt. It was the look of a superior, not a subordinate. She met Harrison's gaze again. The final term, she said, her voice dropping back into a whisper. "The probability function for the tunneling event, PQS. It's incorrectly defined. It doesn't account for relativistic effects on the electron shell at high energy states. It assumes a static electron density. It's not static." The room went completely silent. Mr. Davenport and Mr. Tanaka exchanged bewildered looks. They were fluent in profit margins and market caps, not quantum mechanics. Kendrick's face, which had been a mask of smug triumph, began to drain of color. He looked at Bella as if she were an apparition. That's absurd. Who are you to question my work?" "This is the most advanced research in the field." "It's stolen research." Bella said, the words falling from her lips before she could stop them. The dam of her restraint had broken, and the person you stole it from realized the mistake 6 years ago. Under pressure, the catalyst won't just be inefficient, it will become unstable. The entire reaction will cascade. You're not building a green energy solution, Dr. Kendrick. You're building a bomb. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, and they all hit their mark. Harrison Sterling's eyes narrowed, shifting from Bella's resolute face to Kendrick's suddenly panicked one. Kendrick was sweating. A single bead rolled down his temple. He opened his mouth, but only a strangled noise came out. That single physiological sign of fear was more damning than any confession. Harrison slowly, deliberately capped his Mont Blanc pen. The click was like a gunshot in the silent alcove. He placed it neatly beside the unsigned contract. "Gentlemen," he said to his investors, his voice a chillingly calm sea after a storm. "It appears we need to pause for a moment to verify a technical query. My sincerest apologies for the interruption. Please enjoy a dessert on me. Robert." He snapped his gaze, locking onto his scientist. "Stay here." He stood up, his tall frame commanding absolute authority. He looked at Bella. "You. With me. Now." He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and strode out of the alcove, expecting her to follow. Bella felt 100 pairs of eyes on her as she placed the water pitcher on a nearby service stand, her hands moving with an automated grace she didn't feel. Her manager, a perpetually stressed man named Francois, was already power-walking towards her, his face a thundercloud. "Rossi, what in God's name do you think you're doing?" he hissed. Before she could answer, Harrison Sterling's voice cut across the dining room. He had stopped at the entrance, turning back. He didn't shout, but his voice carried an unmistakable weight that silenced the entire restaurant. "She's with me, Francois," he said, using the manager's name with a familiarity that was both a shock and a threat. "Add any damages to my bill." Francois froze mid-stride, his mouth agape. Bella straightened her apron, took a deep breath, and walked away from her table, away from her job, away from the life she had been hiding in. She walked past the gawking diners and the stunned staff, her head held high, and followed the billionaire out into the cool New York night, leaving $100 million deal and the ruins of her quiet life in her wake. The gilded cage was behind her, but she had no idea what lay ahead. The ride in Harrison Sterling's Maybach was a silent, tension-filled journey through the neon-streaked canyons of Manhattan. The car's interior was a cocoon of silent, opulent leather, a world away from the clatter of the restaurant kitchen. Bella sat opposite him, her hands folded in her lap, the simple black fabric of her uniform seeming out of place against the plush cream upholstery. She could feel his eyes on her, analytical and piercing, as if he were trying to deconstruct her into her base components. He didn't speak until they were ascending in a private high-speed elevator in a sleek glass tower in the financial district. The building was home to the global headquarters of Sterling Dynamics. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice flat. "Isabella Rossi. And you're a waitress." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact that he was trying to reconcile with the impossible event that had just occurred. For the past 5 years, yes. And before that. The elevator doors opened into a sprawling, minimalist office. It was more like an art gallery than a workspace with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a godlike view of the city. A single massive desk made of polished obsidian stood in the center. Bella hesitated, the ghosts of her past swirling around her. Before that, I was a doctoral candidate in computational chemistry at Caltech. Harrison stopped and turned to face her fully. A flicker of understanding crossed his features. Caltech. Who was your advisor, Dr. Marcus Albright? The name landed with a quiet thud. Harrison knew him. Albright was a star in the academic world, frequently collaborating with private industry. I've read his work, Harrison said slowly, including his 2019 paper on proton transfer catalysis, the one he co-authored with a postdoc, Robert Kendrick. Bella's silence was her confirmation. The air crackled with unspoken implications. That paper, Harrison continued, his voice dangerously soft, was the theoretical foundation for our entire green hydrogen project. It's what I invested $80 million of R&D into, and it was based on a flawed premise, Bella said, her voice finally finding its strength. A flaw I found and reported to Albright a week before he published. He stole my thesis, removed my name, and published it with Kendrick. Harrison stared at her, his mind racing, piecing together the ugly puzzle. The ambitious professor, the eager postdoc, the brilliant but naive graduate student. It was a story as old as academia itself. "Why didn't you fight it?" he asked, his tone less an accusation and more a genuine inquiry, with what Bella's laugh was brittle. I was a 24-year-old student with $50,000 in debt. He was a tenured department head with the full backing of the university. Their lawyers would have buried me. So I did the only thing I could. I disappeared. He led her to a conference room adjacent to his office. With a tap on a glass wall, it frosted over, becoming opaque. He gestured for her to sit at the long, empty table. He remained standing, pacing like a cuttled panther. Tonight at that table, I was about to commit $100 million from my investors and leverage the future of my company on that formula, he said, thinking aloud. If you are right, you didn't just save me from a bad investment. You saved my entire company from catastrophic failure and public disgrace. If you are wrong, you're a lunatic who just cost me the biggest deal of my life for nothing. He stopped pacing and leaned on the table, his hands flat, his face close to hers. So Isabella Rossi, former Caltech prodigy, I need to know. How certain are you? 100%, she said, without a moment's hesitation. The math doesn't lie. Dr. Kendrick's math is lying. Prove it. It was the ultimate challenge. For the next hour, Harrison Sterling grilled her. He wasn't just a businessman. His own background was in physics and engineering. He threw complex questions at her, citing obscure principles of quantum electrodynamics and materials science. He was testing her, pushing her, trying to find a crack in her knowledge. He found none. Bella, freed from the constraints of her waitress persona, came alive. The years of repressed knowledge and passion flooded back. She talked about spin-orbit coupling, about relativistic quantum chemistry, about the limitations of the Born-Oppenheimer approximation in their specific context. She filled a whiteboard with equations, her handwriting swift and confident. The tired waitress was gone, replaced by a razor-sharp scientist. Harrison watched his initial skepticism melting away into a dawning sense of awe, which quickly curdled into a cold, hard fury, directed squarely at his head of R&D. As Bella finished deriving the corrected version of the pull function, Harrison's phone buzzed. It was a text from Mr. Davenport. "Harrison, what the hell is going on?" Kendrick just left the restaurant looking like he'd seen a ghost. "Tanaka is ready to walk," Harrison typed a quick reply. "Minor snag. Sit tight. I'll handle it. He looked up at Bella, a new expression on his face. It was one of calculated respect. All right, Ms. Rossi, he said, his tone shifting from interrogator to commander. You've convinced me there's a fire. Now I need you to help me find the arsonist. I'm giving you full access to our R&D servers. Everything. The raw data, the simulation logs, Kendrick's private project files. I want you to find me undeniable proof that he knew. I need the smoking gun. He paused, his gaze unwavering. My company is now in your hands. Can you do it? Bella looked at the complex equations on the whiteboard, her equations finally seeing the light of day. This was a chance not just for vindication, but for justice. A chance to reclaim the future that had been stolen from her. Yes, she said, her voice ringing with a conviction she hadn't felt in 6 long years. I can. The Sterling Dynamics R&D lab was a stark contrast to the opulent executive suite. It was a cathedral of science, a sprawling, sterile white space, humming with the quiet power of supercomputers, and filled with the blue glow of holographic displays. For Bella, stepping inside was like taking her first breath after years of drowning. The scent of ionized air and clean room solvents was a perfume she had forgotten she loved. Harrison led her to a restricted access terminal in a glass-walled office. This was Kendrick's primary workstation. He explained, his voice tight with controlled anger. You'll have my personal override. Level 1 clearance. Nothing is hidden from you. He tapped his security card and pressed his thumb to a biometric scanner. With a soft chime, the system unlocked. The screen flickered to life, displaying complex molecular models and reams of data. My head of security, a man named Gavin, is a ghost in the system. He'll ensure Kendrick can't wipe anything remotely. But Kendrick is smart. If he's hiding something, it'll be buried deep, Harrison said. I have to go and placate my investors. I'm buying you time. Use it well. He left her alone. The silence of the lab settled around her, broken only by the whisper of the server fans. For a moment, the sheer scale of the task was paralyzing. She was sifting through a mountain of data equivalent to the entire Library of Congress, looking for a single deliberately hidden needle. But then the muscle memory of a researcher kicked in. She started not with Kendrick's conclusions, but with the raw, unprocessed sensor data from the experimental catalytic reactor. This was where the truth lived, before it could be manipulated or massaged to fit a desired outcome. The hours bled into one another. Bella forgot she was a waitress in a cheap, worn-out uniform. She was a scientist on the hunt. She compiled terabytes of data, her fingers flying across the holographic keyboard, her mind navigating complex data structures with an agility she thought she'd lost. She found the first discrepancy at 3:17 a.m. It was in the logs for a simulation run from 6 months prior. The official report signed by Kendrick showed a perfect, stable energy output. But Bella, digging into the machine-level logs, found the original unaltered data stream. For a nanosecond at peak pressure, the simulation had recorded an anomalous energy spike, a massive, uncontrolled release of gamma radiation. It was exactly what her corrected formula predicted. "Got you," she whispered to the empty room. The simulation hadn't crashed. A sophisticated subroutine had kicked in, isolating the anomaly and flagging it as a sensor error before continuing the test under modified parameters. The final report was a lie constructed from the falsified data. Someone had programmed the system to ignore reality. Bella dug deeper, looking for the origin of that subroutine. It was a masterful piece of code designed to be almost invisible. But its digital signature was unique. She cross-referenced it across the entire network. And then she found it again. And again. Dozens of simulations, all with the same hidden flaw, the same automatic data scrub. Kendrick hadn't made a mistake. He had systematically and deliberately concealed the instability of the catalyst for over a year. As dawn approached, casting a pale grey light over the city, Bella found the next piece of the puzzle. It was a folder hidden within the operating system's kernel files, a place no one would ever think to look. The folder was named M.A. Contingency. M.A. Marcus Albright, her former professor. Her blood ran cold. The folder was protected by a layer of powerful AES-256 encryption. It was a digital vault. Without the key, it was impenetrable. Bella's mind raced. What would the key be? A password? A phrase? Something personal to Kendrick and Albright. She thought back to her time in the lab, to the arrogant pronouncements of her professor. Albright had been obsessed with the greats of physics. He often quoted one in particular when talking about discovery. Raffiniert ist der Herrgott, aber boshaft ist nicht. Subtle is the Lord, but malicious he is not. Einstein's famous declaration of faith in a rational universe. Albright loved to say it. With trembling fingers, Bella typed the German phrase into the decryption prompt. She hit enter. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then the screen flashed, decryption successful. The folder opened. It contained only 2 files. The first was a financial ledger. It detailed a series of untraceable cryptocurrency payments from a holding company in the Cayman Islands to an account linked to Dr. Robert Kendrick. The total came to $5 million. The name of the holding company was a simple, chilling anagram, Omnigen, Richard Hayes's company, Sterling's biggest rival. The second file was a short audio recording. Bella clicked on it. The voice that filled the silent office was unmistakable. It was Dr. Kendrick speaking to Richard Hayes. "The deal is set for tomorrow night," Kendrick's voice said, tinny and conspiratorial. "Sterling will sign. The investors will be locked in. Once they break ground on the first plant in Arizona, we give the data to our contact at the EPA. The anonymous tip. We show them the instability. Sterling Dynamics will be buried in lawsuits and regulatory hell. The stock will collapse. You'll be able to acquire their entire patent portfolio, including the real stable formula for pennies on the dollar." There was a pause, then Richard Hayes's smooth, predatory voice. "And the stable formula. You're sure you have it?" "Of course," Kendrick replied, and the next words hit Bella like a physical blow. Albright's little protege figured it out years ago, just before he pushed her out. He's been sitting on it ever since. The corrected pool function. It's a work of art. The key was adjusting the sigma value for relativistic effects. A small change, but it makes all the difference. Bella sank back into the chair. Her breath knocked out of her. It was all there. The sabotage, the corporate espionage, the theft of her work, not once but twice. Kendrick wasn't just hiding a flaw. He was planning to sell the cure to the highest bidder after the company he worked for was a smoking crater. She saved the audio file and the ledger to a secure external drive. She had her smoking gun. In fact, she had an entire arsenal. Just as she was about to call Harrison, an alert flashed in the corner of her screen. "Security warning, unauthorized level 1 access detected. Sector 7G. Someone else was in the system with the same clearance level as her. She checked the access logs. The credentials weren't Harrison's. They were Kendrick's. But he was supposed to be locked out. Then she saw it. A remote deletion command was being executed, targeting the kernel directory, where she'd found the encrypted folder. He was trying to cover his tracks. Gavin Harrison's security chief would stop him, but it would take a few seconds. In those seconds, the original files could be wiped forever. Bella didn't hesitate. She initiated a system-wide lockdown command, using Harrison's override to shut down all network access to the R&D servers. Her own terminal would be cut off as well, but it would be too late for Kendrick. A new warning flashed on her screen. This one more urgent. Physical breach alert, restricted lab. Level 3. Proximity sensor triggered. Someone was in the building. Someone was coming. And she was locked in the lab with the only existing copy of the evidence that could destroy them. The quiet hum of the servers was suddenly replaced by a much more menacing sound, the heavy metallic thump of a magnetic lock engaging. Bella was sealed inside the lab. The lockdown command had worked, but it had also turned her sanctuary into a trap. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, flooded her veins. Kendrick wasn't just trying to delete files from home. He was here. He must have used a physical keycard or an old passcode that Gavin's digital sweep had missed. He was coming to destroy the evidence at its source. She looked around the sterile room. There were no weapons, no hiding places, just glass walls and glowing machines. The main door to the lab was a thick slab of reinforced steel. She watched the small security panel next to it. A red light blinked ominously. Access denied. System lockdown. She heard a muffled shout of frustration from the hallway, followed by a series of frantic beeps as Kendrick tried his keycard again and again. He was locked out. But for how long a man desperate enough to commit industrial sabotage on this scale wouldn't be stopped by a locked door? Bella's mind, trained to find solutions in complex systems, went into overdrive. She had the evidence on the thumb drive in her pocket. The original files were safe on the isolated server, but if Kendrick got to the terminal, he could physically destroy the machine. She needed to get out. She raced back to the workstation. The lockdown had severed her connection to the outside world. No phone, no internet. But she still had control of the lab's internal network. She pulled up the building schematics. The lab was part of a larger research wing, a labyrinth of clean rooms, server farms, and testing chambers. The lockdown had sealed the entire wing, but there might be another way out. Her eyes scanned the blueprints. A service corridor. A maintenance hatch designed for coolant pipe access. It was small, but it led into the building's ventilation system. It was a crazy movie plot idea, but it was the only one she had. From the hallway came a new sound, a high-pitched whirring noise. A drill. He was trying to bypass the electronic lock. She was running out of time. She located the maintenance hatch behind a large server rack. It was secured with 4 heavy bolts. Using a heavy metal stool as a wrench, she threw all her weight into turning them. Her muscles, accustomed to carrying trays and not turning industrial bolts, screamed in protest. One by one, with a groan of stressed metal, they gave way. She pulled the heavy panel open, revealing a dark, dusty shaft just big enough for a person to crawl through. Cool, recycled air washed over her face. She hesitated for a second, then hoisted herself inside, pulling the heavy panel closed behind her. Total darkness. The air was cold and smelled of dust and machine oil. She was in the guts of the skyscraper. Using the light from her phone, which had no signal but still worked as a flashlight, she began to crawl. The sounds of Kendrick's drill faded behind her, replaced by the deep, rhythmic hum of the building's life support. The schematics she had memorized were her only guide. Left at the first junction, then right past a massive air circulation fan that churned the air with terrifying force. It was a claustrophobic nightmare, but the drive in her pocket felt like a talisman pushing her forward. She was aiming for a vertical shaft that she hoped would lead down to the lower, non-secured floors. As she crawled, her mind kept replaying the audio file. Albright's little protégé figured it out years ago. The casual, dismissive cruelty of it fueled her resolve. This wasn't just about Harrison Sterling's company anymore. It was about reclaiming her own name. Suddenly, her phone screen went black. The battery was dead. The darkness was absolute. The humming of the fans seemed to grow louder, more menacing. Panic, cold and suffocating, began to close in. She was lost, blind, in a metal maze 60 stories above the ground. She fought it down, forcing herself to breathe slowly. She could still feel the flow of air. The schematics were burned into her brain. She kept crawling, navigating by touch and memory. After what felt like an eternity, her hand touched a different texture. A ladder. The vertical shaft. Relief washed over her so intensely her knees went weak. She began to climb down, her hands and knees scraped raw by the rough metal. She descended 2 floors before her foot hit a solid surface. Another access panel. She pushed. It swung open with a rusty creak, flooding her eyes with the dim artificial light of a deserted office floor. She tumbled out, covered in dust and grease, her waitress uniform torn and stained. The floor was empty, a sea of dark cubicles. It was a sales department, an entirely different section of the building. She had made it out of the lockdown zone. She ran for the emergency stairwell, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence. She burst through the door and didn't stop running, taking the stairs 2 at a time, descending floor after floor. As she reached the ground-level lobby, she saw them. Harrison Sterling, flanked by 2 formidable-looking security guards, was arguing with the night shift staff. He looked frantic, his usual composure completely gone. "Miss Rosie Isabella," he shouted, his voice filled with a mixture of raw panic and immense relief as he saw her emerge from the stairwell. She stumbled towards him, exhausted but triumphant, and held up the small black thumb drive. "I have it, Mr. Sterling," she gasped, her voice hoarse. "I have everything." Just as he took the drive from her hand, the lobby elevator chimed. The doors slid open. Standing inside was Dr. Robert Kendrick. His face was pale, his suit disheveled, and his hands were covered in grease. In one hand he clutched a portable drill. His eyes widened in shock as he saw Bella standing with Harrison. He looked from her to the drive in Harrison's hand, and back to her face. In that single silent moment, he knew he was finished. His desperate gamble had failed. He made a sound, a choked guttural cry of despair, and lunged. Not for Harrison or the drive, but for Bella. It was a purely instinctual, hateful act, an attempt to destroy the person who had brought his world crashing down. But he never reached her. Harrison's security guards moved with startling speed, intercepting him in a blur of motion. They tackled him to the marble floor with a sickening thud. The drill clattered away across the polished surface. The great Dr. Robert Kendrick, the man who had almost duped the world, was reduced to a writhing, defeated figure on the lobby floor of the company he had tried to destroy. Harrison ignored the commotion. He looked at Bella at her torn clothes and the exhaustion etched on her face. He saw not a waitress, but a warrior. "Let's go finish this," he said, his voice quiet, but filled with the promise of a reckoning. The emergency board meeting was convened in the main conference room on the 60th floor, the very room Bella had been in just hours before. The sun was now fully up, casting long, dramatic shadows across the city. The mood, however, was dark and stormy. Mr. Davenport and Kenji Tanaka sat at the long obsidian table, their faces grim. They had been summoned by Harrison in the pre-dawn hours with a message that was both cryptic and alarming. They looked exhausted, confused, and deeply skeptical. $100 million deal didn't get paused by a waitress without serious consequences. Bella sat beside Harrison at the head of the table. She had been given a chance to clean up in a private washroom, but she had refused to change out of her torn and grimy waitress uniform. It was a statement. It was who she was when this began, and she would wear it as a badge of honor at the end. The door opened, and two of Harrison's security guards escorted a pale, haggard-looking Dr. Kendrick into the room. His wrists were in silver handcuffs. They sat him down at the far end of the table, opposite Harrison. The silence was heavy enough to bend steel. "Gentlemen." Harrison began, his voice cold and precise. "I apologize for the dramatics of the past few hours. When we last spoke, a serious allegation was made against the integrity of our project. I felt it was my duty to investigate it thoroughly before proceeding." He nodded towards Bella. "This is Isabella Rossi. She is the individual who brought this matter to my attention. She is also, as it turns out, the true architect of the foundational theory our entire project is based upon." Davenport and Tanaka stared at Bella, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and dawning curiosity. "That's preposterous," Kendrick spat from the end of the table, his voice cracking. "She's a nobody, a disgruntled, failed student trying to blackmail her way into a fortune." Harrison ignored him. He slid a tablet to the center of the table. "Robert, you're right about one thing. Ms. Rossi is a brilliant scientist. So brilliant, in fact, that she not only identified the flaw in your formula, she also found where you buried the evidence of your fraud." He tapped the tablet. A file directory appeared on the large screen at the end of the room. It showed the contents of the MA contingency folder. As you can see, Harrison continued, his voice dripping with ice. Dr. Kendrick was not merely incompetent. He was malicious. He knew the catalyst was unstable. He systematically programmed our simulation software to fake the results and hide the danger. He played the audio file. Kendrick's conspiratorial voice filled the conference room, laying out the entire plot to bankrupt Sterling Dynamics and sell the corrected formula to OmniGen. When Richard Hayes's voice came on, Kenji Tanaka let out a sharp, angry hiss. OmniGen had been a thorn in his own firm's side for years. When the recording ended, the silence was absolute. Kendrick had shrunk in his chair, his face ashen. Mr. Davenport looked like he had been punched in the gut. "The $5 million in cryptocurrency has already been traced," Harrison said calmly. Half went to Kendrick. The other half went to his accomplice, Dr. Marcus Albright at Caltech, who provided him with the corrected formula, Miss Rossi's corrected formula, which they planned to sell after my company was in ruins. Kendrick finally broke. "He made me do it," he shrieked, pointing a trembling, cuffed hand towards the speaker, from which his own voice had come. "Hayes." He approached me. He knew about the flaw. Albright told him. They said Sterling was a fool and I was wasting my talent. They offered me everything. His voice trailed off into a pathetic sob. Harrison. Sterling rose to his feet, his towering frame radiating a cold, righteous fury. You didn't just try to defraud my investors and me, he said, his voice low and menacing as he walked toward Kendrick. You were willing to build a facility that could have exploded. You were willing to let people die to cover your tracks and cash in. The only reason that isn't happening is because of her. He gestured to Bella. Because a woman you and Albright dismissed and tried to erase had more integrity in her little finger than you have in your entire body. She was working for minimum wage cleaning up after people like you. Yet she had the courage to speak up to prevent a catastrophe while you were counting your blood money. He stopped directly in front of Kendrick. You're not just fired, Robert. I'm going to personally fund the federal investigation into you, into Albright, and into Richard Hayes. I will spend whatever it takes to ensure that you all spend the rest of your miserable lives in prison cells. Get him out of my sight. The guards hauled the weeping Kendrick to his feet and dragged him from the room. Harrison walked back to the head of the table. He looked at Davenport and Tanaka, whose expressions had transformed from skepticism to horrified respect. Gentlemen, he said, his tone shifting back to business. The Sterling Kendrick catalyst is dead. However, he looked at Bella, a genuine admiring smile touching his lips for the first time. The Rossi catalyst is very much alive, Miss. Rossi has provided me with her corrected formula. It's not just stable. It's 20% more efficient than even Kendrick's faked data predicted. We are not back at square one. We are a light year ahead of where we thought we were. He picked up the contract portfolio that had been sitting on the table since the night before. With a decisive rip, he tore the signature page in half. He then turned to his laptop, typed for a moment, and a new document projected onto the screen. It was a new partnership agreement. This is a new deal, Harrison announced. Sterling Dynamics is forming a new subsidiary to oversee this technology. It will be called Rossi Sterling Innovations. Ms. Rossi will be appointed its Chief Technology Officer with a 25% equity stake and full creative control over the research. That is my non-negotiable term. Are we still in business? Mr. Davenport and Kenji Tanaka looked at each other. They looked at the new projections on the screen. Then they looked at Bella, the quiet waitress in a torn uniform, who now held the keys to the future of green energy. Davenport broke into a wide grin. Mr. Sterling, he said, extending a hand, not to Harrison, but across the table to Bella. It would be an honor to invest in Ms. Rossi's company. 6 months later, Isabella Rossi stood in a lab that made the one at Sterling Dynamics look like a high school chemistry classroom. The Rossi Sterling Innovation Center was a testament to what could be achieved when brilliance was given the resources it deserved. Sunlight streamed through vast 3-story windows, glinting off state-of-the-art equipment that Bella herself had hand-picked. She wore a crisp white lab coat over a simple but elegant dress. The black waitress uniform was a distant memory, a skin she had shed. Her team of 20 elite scientists, whom she had hired from the best universities in the world, worked diligently around her, their faces alight with the passion of discovery. The centerpiece of the lab was a gleaming pilot-scale catalytic reactor. Today was its first full-power activation. Harrison Sterling stood beside her, his usual bespoke suit replaced by a lab coat identical to hers. The investors Davenport and Tanaka watched from a safe glass-enclosed observation deck, their faces beaming. Ready CTO Rossi Harrison asked a playful but respectful tone in his voice. They had become partners in the truest sense of the word, their relationship built on a foundation of mutual admiration and a shared vision. "Ready, CEO Sterling?" She replied with a confident smile. She initiated the startup sequence. On a massive monitor, data began to stream in. Pressure, temperature, energy input. And finally, the catalytic efficiency rating. The numbers climbed steadily, surpassing the old flawed projections, surpassing even her own corrected estimates. It settled at a number that made the whole room gasp. 78% efficiency. Harrison breathed his eyes wide. "Bella, that's impossible. The math doesn't lie," she said, softly echoing her own words from that fateful night. A round of applause erupted from the observation deck. Bella felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. It was more than just success. It was a restoration. Later that day, she sat in her spacious, sunlit office, the one that had replaced Harrison's imposing obsidian suite. A framed napkin hung on her wall, not the original from Aurelia, but a new one. On it, in her own handwriting, was the correct formula, the Rossi equation. The small subscript R for Rossi and the REL for the relativistic correction were a quiet testament to her victory. Her personal phone buzzed. It was a picture from her mother, who was on a cruise in the Mediterranean. Her medical bills paid off her health better than it had been in years. "Thinking of you, my brilliant daughter," the message read. There was a knock on her door. It was Harrison. "I have some news you might find interesting," he said, holding out a tablet. The headline was from a major financial journal. Omnigen CEO Richard Hayes indicted in corporate espionage scandal. Former Professor Albright and scientist Kendrick to testify in exchange for reduced sentences. Justice. It wasn't just an abstract concept. It was real, and it was deeply satisfying. "They deserved it," Bella said simply. "They did." Harrison agreed. He looked around her office at the woman she had become, or rather the woman she had been all along. "It's funny," he mused. "I went to that dinner to sign a $100 million deal. I thought I was buying a formula. But it turns out I found something infinitely more valuable." "And what's that?" Bella asked, a curious smile playing on her lips. "The person who wrote it," he said. "I just had to look past the uniform to see her." Bella looked out the window at the city skyline, no longer a barrier of unattainable lights, but a landscape of possibility. Her past was not an anchor, but a foundation. She had walked through the fire of betrayal and emerged not burned, but forged. She was Isabella Rossi, and she was finally, truly home. In the end, it wasn't about the money or the fame. It was about integrity. Isabella Rossi's story reminds us that our circumstances don't define our worth. The world may see a waitress, a cashier, a janitor, but inside each of us can be a mind capable of changing the world. It's a powerful lesson in courage, the courage to speak truth to power, even when your voice is shaking. Harrison Sterling thought he had all the answers, but the most important truth came from the one person in the room everyone else had been trained to ignore. What hidden talents and forgotten dreams are lying dormant inside you, just waiting for the right moment to speak up? If this story inspired you or made you think, please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to share it with someone who needs to hear that their voice matters. For more stories about the hidden heroes and incredible twists of fate that shape our world, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next.